Mauritius, one of the most dynamic economies in Africa, a success story of political, social and financial stability. Think about it. We had nothing, no minerals, no oil or precious stones. So what made this success? You won't find it here or here. Come closer. It's a story about people.
If you ever call my name, I will answer.
It's about our openness. It's in our DNA, proud of the multicultural origins of our people from Europe, Africa and Asia. Our capacity to live and work together, our agility to do business with the world, our entrepreneurial drive and resilience define who we are. We are MCB.
You're stranded in the rain, I will shelter.
And in financial news, the unique global offer in financial expertise of MCB, the leading bank of Mauritius since 1838, has made them one of a few investment-grade banks in Africa, weighing in an over $2 billion capitalization.
And just like Mauritius, our real value lies in our people and in our commitment.
If you ever call my name, I will answer.
Today, our natural openness to the world allows us to empower new ventures in Africa and beyond. Our unique global perspective opens endless possibilities for international business.
Hello and welcome back to Africa Forward Together. Our sincere apologies for this slight delay. As usual, live sessions have unforeseen circumstances. Thank you so much for joining us for this third webinar in the AFT series, which will tackle today the topic of payments and its performance in a low-touch economy, a reality that has caught up with us brutally fast this year. Looking back over the past 5 years, the payments landscape in Africa had already been one of the most resilient, innovative, and dynamic segments in banking and financial services, even compared to the rest of the world. This year, with the COVID-19 pandemic triggering a severe disruption in our lives, how people pay and transact has been transformed equally so. With regards to payments specifically, trends we were forecasting over 5, 10 or even 15 years materialized in the space of mere weeks, an acceleration no one could have anticipated, let alone imagine. Indeed, the adoption of new digital channels and form of payments has shifted onto another plane altogether, driven by necessity, fear associated by consumers of this new pandemic, and sometimes a lack of alternative. These recent trends we are seeing are all the more remarkable since you will recall last year's AFT survey where you, the AFT community, collectively identify the reluctance of consumers to adopt new digital channels and solutions as a major challenge. Despite banks' efforts to promote and develop these solutions. Well, this challenge this year has been and is being resolved much faster than anyone anticipated. But it is also presenting us, the collective community of banks and financial institutions, with a lot of uncertainty. We are asking ourselves a lot of questions and we are faced with new challenges. Notably, how permanent this shift in consumer behavior is, how resilient and ready are we to adopt this new normal in terms of capacity, infrastructure, and above all, security, and how are banks and FIs today gearing up to operate in this new normal. Well, today's webinar aims to provide you with insights and the latest trends on these questions. And it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce three speakers who have been at the forefront of these trends and with extensive experience in payment solutions in the region. I'm very pleased to welcome Stephanie Tseung, the head of cards of MCB Limited, who is overseeing the bank's effort to drive its customers' transition to a cashlite economy. Also here with me today is Christine Durant, welcome Christine, and Deenesh Somrah, both from ICPS. ICPS being a leading payment technology company serving over 400 institutions today across more than 90 countries. ICPS is a joint venture between MCB Group and HPS, who you will recall is the leading payment solutions provider, transcending all the payments value chain. So ICPS offering, covering not only the payments value chain such as issuing, acquiring, processing, gateway, back office, security, and also consultancy and e-learning solutions. So ICPS today positions itself as a hub for payment schemes as well as a gateway payment processing provider in Africa. So Christine is the oversees business development at ICPS, while Deenesh oversees IT, security, risk, and compliance at ICPS. So thank you all three for joining us. And to our audience, do not forget you can always interact with us through comments or questions that you can submit through the GoToWebinar platform. So to start, Stephanie, speaking of the recent trends I've just mentioned and the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, you have had, well, a first-hand experience of overseeing MCB's payment strategy and the bank's response during the lockdown crisis. Can you share with us some of your observations on how consumers have reacted and how MCB was resilient during this process?
Okay, so good afternoon to everyone and a warm welcome to this AFT webinar. As you rightly mentioned in your introduction, payments, I always say, is the financial services that impact everyday life. Whether you're a consumer, whether you're a business, every day you need to make payment choices, right? And the COVID-19 crisis has impacted the way that we live, the way that we work, the way that we travel. So it is without question that it has a big impact on the payments industry. So from MCB's perspective, we were already preparing what we call a pandemic response plan, but we had like several phases, but of course life doesn't happen that way. So we went into total lockdown overnight. But one thing for sure, the country may have been in lockdown, but life still happens, right? People still need to feed themselves. They still need to take care of themselves. So our utmost priority was how to make our payment solutions as simple, seamless, and as safe as possible, right? So, and when running a payments business, you need to anticipate what I call macro trends, and anticipate also how you can nudge your customers into adopting the right behavior. So prior to COVID, we were already, from a business perspective, ready with contactless payments, right? And also ready with online payment solutions. And that has proven to be very essential during the lockdown, right? Having said that, if you're running a payments business, it is driven by volumes, right? And the fact that people are staying at home, of course, consumer spending is dampened. You also have, suddenly you don't have cross-border transactions, which account for a significant part of our business. So you need to be able to maneuver this sort of like rough, that trough, because while volumes are down, you're not getting the volumes, you've got cost and fixed costs that you still need to absorb. So from an MCB perspective, we have been able to waiver that, because we already adopted an omni-channel strategy. So as I said, we were already ready with contactless payments, and we pushed that forward. We were also ready with enabling our various merchants to adopt e-commerce, online payments, and that has proven to be a key business need during the lockdown, right? So this has, and also riding on to local payments, because suddenly, as I said, the borders were closed, and we were already engaged into accompanying our various customers to adopt digital means of payments. So as you rightly said, so COVID sort of like accelerated this this whole movement. But for it to act as an accelerator, you need to have all the blocks already in place, and we already had those blocks in place. And now that Mauritius is no longer in total lockdown, but borders are still partially closed, we are registering a growth in our payments volumes, because we are pushing, you know, local payments volumes, and still educating our customers to adopt digital means of payments. Having said that, this is what we anticipated, and I think that the business was geared and equipped to enable, as I said, safe payments. During the lockdown, we did face some challenges, I must say. For instance, like expired cards. You know, cards were expired, and cards were being produced, but we couldn't get it through to the end user. And this is something that we need to start working on, because there are digital solutions out there. And I believe, Christine, you've enabled virtual cards for some of your customers in Africa.
That is right. Thank you, Stephanie, for asking the question. And thank you, Evan, for the early introduction. So yeah, to answer your question, we've actually implemented a few virtual cards for a few of our clients on our platform. Now, that was done before COVID, but we had some other clients during the COVID crisis as well, who actually asked for virtual cards. So what's important here, maybe to precise, is that virtual cards actually respond to a particular requirement. And usually when people think about virtual cards, they think about a single usage on e-commerce, you know, so that your card data is not exposed on the internet. But then there's been a shift in terms of usage from B2B to actually consumer. Consumers actually wanting to use their virtual cards. And that's actually come with MNOs. So we've actually implemented for 2 banks in East Africa. So these banks were more on the traditional way of using virtual cards, so for single use on e-commerce. But then during COVID, we've seen different types of customers for virtual cards, and that's the MNOs I'm talking about. So why this sudden change in situation is because what everyone had in hand was their mobiles. So how to use that money in their mobiles is to give them a virtual card. So we've helped them implement these virtual cards for them to be able to give an access to that race that actually started once COVID was there, because it hit the world. And the e-commerce websites, there's been an actual surge in the utilization, and MNOs wanted a piece of it. So we've had MNOs in African region that wanted to do that, and they actually came to us for that. But you also mentioned other issues during COVID crisis, like postal issues. So when we think about postal issues, there's also the PINs. So we've had banks that still use the paper pins. So with these paper pins, if there's no post, you can't deliver them, obvious. Also, we've seen cases of people being locked out of the country with their cards being expired. So for these customers, what do? You ship them a card, but then because of security reasons, you need to wait for a particular period to actually send them their PIN. So that means that for 2 weeks they've got nothing to use, and they're in panic mode already because they're not in their country. Now you add to that no means of payment, crisis. So what we did for these clients is we actually gave them another means of another channel to be able to get their PIN. So those who had access to smartphones, they could actually use the application to choose their PIN, their online PIN, for those who like the technical part of it. But those who didn't have the application could receive an SMS with the PIN, a flash PIN. Important to use the word flash. Deenesh is going to elaborate a little bit more on that, because it's not natively stored on your phone. So the security aspect is very important when we talk about PINs and virtual cards. And I think that Deenesh has got more experience on that, and I'm sure he'll share some best practice on it.
Thank you, Christian. Exactly, very interesting question, and I believe most of the audience will be interested about the security aspect behind payment processing and PINs transferring. So in fact, yes, we are mandated by the payment industry in terms of compliance. We are a PCI DSS validated organization. And with regard to PIN by SMS, we applied all applicable controls with regard to PCI and PIN security. So here there are specific requirements that need to be fulfilled in order to allow this service to happen. In this process, we had controls with regard to transmission and processing of all those sensitive information you rightly mentioned. So since there's no storage, so that's the main reason we use flash, because there's no storage of such sensitive information. And at the back, we have a dedicated connection with a mobile network operator. So we are ensuring security end-to-end, where we are having strong encryption in the channel from ICPS mobile gateway to the mobile operator, and there are several validations which are being done during that call when the user is requesting for a PIN. Mm-hmm. Several controls more on the road ahead. So we've eventually, during the project implementation, there are validation being done. So for example, for virtual card, for PIN by SMS, we do look with our PCI DSS QSA, which is an independent assessor, who help us to identify all the applicable requirements so that we ensure all the controls are onboarded during the implementation phase. Mm-hmm. So here you will see it's a long process. We have to ensure that all those controls are identified first and implemented accordingly to ensure a secure business. At the back as well, we have a dedicated team who is doing the monitoring, who is ensuring business as usual operations, and who also looks into the risk and compliance aspect. So all the changes that we are undergoing on our production environment or rolling out services to our clients has to go through those different phases where we use a risk-based approach to identify all sorts of threats and come up with controls. Controls here, like I mentioned earlier, we align ourselves with industry best practices such as PCI DSS, PCI PIN security, and ISO 27001 framework. During the project delivery phase as well, we have proactive measures. So what we do is we do vulnerability assessment and penetration testing at network, application, and system layer. So we try to proactively identify threats, which eventually hackers or cyber criminals will try to get and get into our system. So these are proactive measures that are mandated by all the requirements, and eventually what we do also on a regular basis to check new threats. So what are there? So what are cyber criminals looking for? And we try to be a bit ahead and fix up all those vulnerabilities.
Thank you, Deenesh. I think this really highlights the importance of thinking ahead, like you just mentioned, and being prepared to the best of our abilities. I mean, to have a pandemic policy already in place. I mean, this is quite a remarkable foresight. But at the same time, I'm sure that no matter how well prepared our organizations can be, the implications and the effects that we have witnessed so far in 2020, I think it's something that no one could, no matter how prepared, no one could, you can't prepare for that level of crisis. An interesting aspect of this actually is the uncertainty regarding the change in behavior, because Stephanie, you mentioned how the behavior of consumers and the patterns have changed drastically. I don't know if you have a couple of metrics which you can share with us later on. But one aspect that we are all thinking, especially as the economies are gradually easing their lockdown, is how permanent this change is and how sticky the behavior of consumers will be in the new normal. As maybe consumers lose the fear factor, you know, that they had before. So again, maybe considering MCBs and your own experience, what were some of your observations now that the lockdown has been eased, for example, in Mauritius?
Okay. Two different types of behaviors and observations. One, so I mentioned contactless payments. I think throughout the world and also in our region, that is Middle East, Africa, the MEA region, contactless payments are scaling. And this, we've observed this in Mauritius during the lockdown and also post-lockdown, right? It is the number of customers using contactless payments have increased by more than 50%. And the amount of contactless payments in supermarkets have increased 4 times. This is in Mauritius, and I've just before joining this webinar, I've checked the MEA, Middle East, Africa stats of both Visa and MasterCard, and they confirm that trend. So I think worldwide, contactless payments are really taking off. In some markets, they were already very much present because each market has got different stages of adoption of contactless payments. For instance, in Europe, it was already a very mature market with regards to contactless payments, and it is keeping its pace. And in emerging market, it is really taking off. Now, when I say contactless payments, there are different types of contactless payments. So in Mauritius, we've got card-based contactless payments, and I've mentioned that it has picked up during COVID, and we've seen that customers are still continue to adopt these types of payments. Right. But there is also mobile-based contactless payments, right? So we've also seen an increase into our mobile payments, Juice mobile payments, which is being sustained, right? E-commerce is a slightly different story, but I think maybe it is specific to Mauritius. So during lockdown, the fact that a lot of shops were closed, the only way for them to sell was to go online, right? So during the lockdown, it's sort of like it was the fastest growing channel. After the easing out of the lockdown, locally, I mean, I noticed that people still sort of like the growth isn't as significant as during the lockdown. It's actually decreased. People still tend to do face-to-face transaction. But I think maybe it's particular to Mauritius because it's actually sort of like, weekend pastime, family outing to actually go into malls, right? But having said that, I always tell our customers, namely our merchants, that I think one of the key lessons during the lockdown is that you really need in 2020 and moving on, adopt an omni-channel strategy. So a lot of businesses are very aware of that, and they are developing their online sales capabilities, even if the demand for it is not as significant for as it was during the lockdown. E-commerce, but we've also said that that's for local e-commerce. Cross-border e-commerce is also picking up. Overall, e-commerce is still a growing channel for us, and I think that cross-border e-commerce will actually be on the rise, because cross-border traveling will go down, and some people, they still need maybe to have access to whether it's goods and services for abroad, or by the sheer fact that subscription services such as Netflix, etc., are picking up. So we are seeing this trend, this sort of like rising trend for cross-border e-commerce, right? But the fight against cash still remains. So, because as you said, we are moving towards a cashlite economy before becoming cashless. And I think within our various markets in Africa, cash is still predominant, but I think it also represents a huge opportunity to turn those cash-based payments into digital payments transaction. So at MCB, we don't rest on our laurels. Even if COVID has accelerated this transition to digital payments, it is still, in Mauritius, we still have more cash transactions than digital payments transactions, as far as consumer payments is concerned. So we continuously do customer education by giving what I call nudges. So whether it is a little plus or a discount or participate in a draw, to continue the education towards digital payments, and also continue to educate merchants, because very often merchants, when they think about accepting digital payment, they say, oh, okay, you're going to take me a commission. But it's not just, it shouldn't be reduced to that, because there is a cost for accepting cash, and very often this goes unnoticed. But I think during the lockdown, merchants are now aware that there is a cost, because you actually, there is a health risk, because the virus can still be on those nodes. But there is also a cost, because you need to count the cash, and also come into branches or wherever you do your cash deposits, ATM, and lose time to actually do the deposit. So there is a cost to cash. Cash isn't free. And I think that the mindset of merchants is gradually changing, and we are working together with them to demonstrate the benefits of accepting digital payments. And sometimes we also go what I call going beyond payments, and later on we can expand on that. So for me, it's we have, I think we've accelerated the transition. We've gained at least 3 to 5 years because of COVID, but the fight against cash isn't over. And when I've mentioned customer education, merchant education, and I think on your perspective, you also need to do bank education also.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So during COVID crisis, we've actually had some banks that went live, and unfortunately, because barriers are closed, we can't travel to these countries, even though we'd love to. So yeah, we used our existing e-learning platform that we've had for a while, but we weren't really using it because people still, they like face-to-face interactions, and this is just humans being humans. We love to talk to each other. But the e-learning platform did actually help. And so when we had these banks kilometers away, we've actually helped them to upskill their staff in the different areas that they were getting into, and to be live without any issues. But I'd just like to touch base a little bit on what you were talking about before with the omni-channels. We've seen a change in pattern recently, in the previous months, so in the COVID stage, where we've had a lot of banks and financial institutions that actually issued RFPs for e-commerce. So that's linked to the increasing your different types of channels that you need to be able to provide to address this business imperative, this new business imperative, if I can call it like that. The thing is that why the question that we're asking ourselves is, why do they really approach us? Because there's a lot of these institutions that really wanted to go into e-commerce before, but that didn't. But all of a sudden, all of them want to go into that market. But instead of doing it in-house, they go and approach a platform, an outsourced platform. So I think that the factor of cost and time to market is also important. So because you can't second guess, you don't know whether that new normal is going to be the permanent new normal. So they find it more appropriate, well actually for these times, to partner with an institution like ours who can, bring them live with a security aspect of it. Deenesh is looking at me. So built with a security layer, so they can actually go live quickly. And if for whatever reason their clients are not really eager to keep into that new normal afterwards, so in the post-COVID stage, then it's easier for them to shift back to their actual traditional channels. That being said, I think it was the Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella that said that in the COVID crisis, there's actually 3 phases. So there's the response stage. So that's what everybody's been doing, we respond. Recovery stage, I think that's where we all are, and that's why the resilient word is the new, trendy word.
Absolutely.
But after that, there's the reimagine phase. And this is where you need to be creative. And so in the RFPs, why I'm talking about that is because in the RFPs, we see 2 types of requests. Those who actually just want to go live, just like that, to be able to get into the race. And those who actually are thinking about afterwards. And so they're not only thinking about an e-commerce platform, but an e-commerce platform with all sorts of plugins to be able to be ready for the next, in the next phase of what's to come afterwards. So that being said, when we talk about e-commerce, that's like sort of an unsafe, people think in their heads what's linked to internet is not really safe. But I think that Deenesh, if you want to add to that, is e-commerce, when we talk about e-commerce transactions, is that something that we should consider unsafe?
Well, the threat is here, and the risk aspect is evolving. We face new threats every day. But at the back, there are, all sort of enforcement, security controls. Even if we see the huge race that you rightly mentioned, we've seen lots of new players in terms of developing, e-commerce website, developing mobile applications, and leaving behind all the security aspect. If we've seen in some statistics from Trend Micro that most of 80% of mobile applications on Play Store are not that safe because they've not been developed on a security, based on a security best practice. Mm-hmm. So today we started with education. So even as a solution provider at ICPS, we have to be aware of what are those controls, and we've been doing that, on a continuous basis. So we have to work with strategic partners to ensure that we keep the pace, to understand and to know what are those good practices, security practices that we have to take into consideration when doing software development or when partnering, with our partners to give a solution. We have to ensure that all those requirements are listed, and not only this, even for our users. We've talked about clients, but what about our people in our organization? So we regularly do security awareness, and above that we test. So we test our users, whether they, how they respond to a phishing email, for instance. So we will see their behaviors and then as lessons learned, share with them, these are phishing mails, you should behave differently, and that, on a progressively, users will know what's normal to the business and what's not normal. So in terms of reaction, in terms of control, so we have to ensure, even in-house, we are secure.
Thank you, Deenesh. And within your role at ICPS supporting banks' payments infrastructure, what are your observations on ICPS's clients around the region regarding this security aspect? What are some of the trends that you are seeing?
Well, you will recall in webinar 2 where Kevin was mentioning about the Uganda breach.
That's right.
With regard to a money transaction company. So these are threats that are happening every day. So every day is a new day for the cyber criminals. So new attacks, new victims, new breaches. If you just Google in terms of breach, you will definitely find things happening. So the threats are here, and I believe we all facing the same issues. And we've, like your question is about our clients. Yes, we get requests from our clients to help them in review of their existing infrastructure. Since we are running the battlefield like every day, so we have to ensure secure business, secure payment, ecosystem, etc. So we have some clients who work with us, and we work with our partners as well to help them securing their infrastructure. But coming back to the threats, yes, during that pandemic situation, we've seen a rise in cyber attacks and phishing. Yes, if we see reports from, recently I've seen one report from Trend Micro, there were almost 700 new malware from January to March 2020 during that COVID period. So these malware were aiming to collect personal information and credential, and so that fraudsters can use for their personal financial benefit. Card frauds. We've seen lots of, like I mentioned earlier, new e-commerce websites where people had to buy their basic necessities. So just looking around, what's near, and just coming a new website. So we just add our credit card information and everything, waiting for the delivery, and nothing happens. And at the back, the criminals get the credit card information, and they are doing for their financial benefit. Vulnerable mobile application, I mentioned earlier, e-commerce website again, so lots of new developments leaving behind security. Increasing incident related to privacy leakage. So we've been hearing about GDPR, Data Protection Act and everything. So even during that COVID period, there were lots of information, personal information being leaked on the internet. And one question that we usually get from our clients is about visibility. So what do we have, to know what's happening in your network? So what tools are we using, and what type of monitoring we're having? So just imagine, hackers are already on your network and you don't know. So they have plenty of time to roam around to see, where are those information, and they get it. So lack of visibility in our system, network application is key. We've seen, lots of question and interest around that as well. Going through all these threats, yes, we do have solutions, we do have countermeasures, which we also recommend to our clients, so which we can, try to summarize in 5 areas. So first will be data security and threat hunting. So data security has been here for decades with all the organizations. Within the organization, we have process, technology, and people ensuring that data is secure. But now, like we've been evolving in our business strategy, we have to evolve in the security strategy as well. So there are new concepts that we've been implementing, such as threat hunting. Like we go and identify threats or loopholes in the payment ecosystem and try to put at some controls. Privacy gap assessment. So this is also key. We have to ensure, we have to give the trust to our clients, that they are secure with us. So this is also very important. Monitoring, like we've discussed earlier. Monitoring is one thing that we are looking into events, but response is the second part of it. So today we do have technologies that help us with automated response, like fraud monitoring, where based on some sort of behaviors, there are automated response being taken, without human intervention. So these are solutions or strategies that organizations should focus and implement to ensure that you are secure. And one most important aspect as well is to partner with strategic partners in terms of security. So let's say like I mentioned, security is not 100%. You will be breached. So if you're breached, what other actions you will take? So here it's important to have partners with you who can quickly help you to respond, to recover, and to lower that impact on our clients.
Thank you, Deenesh. These are very interesting insights. I can imagine actually what you say is very true regarding how fraud and hacking instances would increase during the lockdown because the hackers have more time to sit down and hack from home. The hackers are working from home as well.
Exactly.
And Stephanie, from your experience and observation at MCB, do you find Deenesh's observation, I mean, did you witness increased safety breaches or attacks on your systems during the lockdown?
Yes, I cannot stress enough the importance of having 24/7 fraud and security systems, because you may try to develop your business, make it ready for the future as much as you can, but if you've got one security breach or one fraud, this can wipe out your whole P&L. So yes, we've witnessed more attacks, if I may say, because we've got what we call bin attacks, that is fraudsters trying to get into what we call bank identification number and try to pass transaction. So we've seen that it increased during the lockdown. And we've got real-time 24/7 anti-fraud solution. So I cannot stress enough on the importance of those tools. In fact, when we were suddenly into lockdown, these were my critical positions, which I knew that I had to equip fully to be able to work from home, because the country may be in lockdown, but as you said, the hackers are not in lockdown. In fact, they are even more active. So whether it is from the office, from home, from wherever you are, you need to be able to have people, because there is systems, but there are also the people that needs to do your fraud monitoring on a 24/7 basis. And not just, and we need to try, because risk zero doesn't exist, but we need to try to sort of like minimize the risk and throughout the end-to-end transactions. So we do it at what we call authorization level. So if a transaction gets to us and we believe that it is a fraudulent transaction, so we would deny the authorization, but it needs to be throughout the whole value chain of the payment. So hence it is important that if you're working with a third-party processor, that they also have security measures in place, and also the payments infrastructure, such as the likes of whether it's SWIFT, Visa, MasterCard, they also need to, because it's all part of the payments ecosystem. Yes.
All right. And going forward for MCB and you as head of cards, how do you anticipate any additional measures that you reckon the organization may need to take going forward? Or
from a fraud and risk perspective,
yes.
Well, it can only be reinforced. So as I said, we've already got real-time 24/7. You mentioned e-commerce. So e-commerce also, we currently do authentication, fully authenticated services. That is, when a customer goes on a website, right, we will prompt the customer for some credentials to make sure that it is the right customer. At least there is what we call I won't go into the technicalities of it, but at least in terms of what we call liability, we shift it to the one who is not secure. But as far as we're concerned, MCB, we aim to have a fully authenticated e-commerce transaction, whether it is from a merchant perspective or from the cardholder perspective. And then also we've got notifications that we send to customers, that so as to make them aware that their card has been used. We also try to empower our customers to have their card security at the control of the fingertips. So for instance, through our Juice mobile app, if let's say you're in Mauritius and you don't want to do online transactions or foreign transactions, you can switch them off, which means that those transactions would get declined. So the bank, we're equipping ourselves from systems perspective to minimize the risk of fraud, and we also aim to empower our customers so that they can also take control of their payments means.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights, Stephanie, Christine, and Deenesh. Maybe one last question I would ask each one of you is, having gone through these exciting months, very stressful I can imagine, so far in 2020, so far it's not over yet, what were some of the key takeaways or lessons learned that really you will note down and going forward in your respective fields? Maybe Christine, you can.
Sure.
I can start with you.
Sure. Maybe one thing for me is that what is sure is that we've shifted from looking for a business case to addressing a particular business imperative. I always say that, I know, but that's the reality of things. Before technology, new technologies were there. All the things we're talking about, whether it's virtual cards, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's flash bins, she's talking about authentication on the e-commerce websites, all these were there. The only thing is that it wasn't really omnipresent because there wasn't, a business case for these things. But now, people, for obvious reasons, for hygienic reasons, etc., they have to use digital means of payments because they can't walk into the shops anymore. So there is a business imperative there, so you need to address it. So how do you address it? You can't, just turn off whatever you were doing before because, like she was saying, there's cost to maintain, there's fixed costs, etc. So you need these to keep on because you don't know what tomorrow will look like. But at the same time, I think it's important to have a partner that will enable you to be able to run the two normals, if I can call it like that, the old normal and the new normal, until we know what the final normal will look like.
That's right.
Yeah, so I think the important thing is to have the right partner that will allow you to ride that wave and not be crushed by it, like you like to say. So I think that's my main takeaway there. So you need to find the right partner who will enable you to be able to stay relevant in these very seismic conditions.
How about you, Deenesh?
Well, as a solution provider with ICPS, for us, we have to ensure business is running. So business resilience for me today is IT resilience and cyber resilience at the back. So we have to ensure that we are able to anticipate, like Stephanie mentioned earlier, anticipate, withstand, and during a crisis, we have to be able to run the business, recover if there is a disruption, how quick we recover, and finally adapt to the situation. So these are few areas where we have to implement to ensure resilience. At our level, we have implemented ISO 22301 framework, which is all about resilience and business continuity. So what worked for us during that pandemic situation, that we had outage plan for people, technology, site and vendors. So, and as the lockdown was announced, we had our crisis committee, etc., and we activated our site outage plan. So we had a plan. Yes, it was not maybe we've tested it like a tabletop, but it was a real test on during that COVID pandemic period where we had to review and adapt, like I said earlier. So for me, I will highly recommend organizations to do a gap assessment with regard to their existing infrastructure to ensure they have processes, procedures or tools in place to ensure security and resilience at the end for the business to work.
Indeed, that's very important. And how about you, Stephanie?
So I've got three main key takeaways based on our real life experience in Mauritius. One is done is better than perfect. I think the current crisis, I mean, prior to the coronavirus emerging throughout the world, I think a lot of companies were talking about, digital transformation. At the bank, we were already in the process of our digital transformation program. And, this is now the change. COVID is accelerating the speed of change. And sometimes, you just don't have time to make it sort of like pitch perfect. But for me, done is better than perfect. So for instance, like we had to change the limit of contactless payments. Maybe the communication to all stakeholders were not as perfect as it could have been, but it's okay, we did it, right? So first takeaway for me is done is better than perfect. You have a minimum viable product, as we say, and then you can iterate and improve. Second, and you've touched upon it, Christine, is especially as banks, we tend to think that we sell an online payment gateway. We sell, a card. No, we need to go beyond payments. And for me, that was evident when we tried to equip our SMEs to accept online payments, whether it is through cards or through Juice, is that their job, the job to be done, isn't to install a payment gateway, is to help them sell. So we have to go beyond payments. Right? It's like helping, how do we sort of like work with various stakeholders to have a local marketplace? Because how are you going to sell online if nobody knows what you're selling and can't get access to your virtual shops, right? So I think this is, it's a change of mindset for us, is like, how do we, because a payment happens only when there is an exchange. I need to pay you because I bought, this cushion from you, right? But it's, to flip the mindset is to say, how can we enable the exchange so that the payment can happen? And that actually opens different opportunities and a different way to make the solutions come live. You will. I mean, we found out that we can't do everything by ourselves, so we need to partner with web developers, with fintechs, even MNOs. So my third takeaway is that partnership matters, because the fact that you need to do different, as I said, different jobs and not just the payment job, it needs to be fast. So you can't do it alone. So partnership matters, whether it is with, as I said, whether it is with your own customers, with your merchants, with fintechs. But we need to, I mean, in this new, as you said, the new normal or the emerging new normal, partnership is key.
Absolutely. What's sure, I think, is that the next few months and years will remain as dynamic and even more fast-paced than ever. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Deenesh, for your insights and observation and for joining us today. And thank you to our audience for sending the questions, which we've received several. You can still send them over the next 5 minutes, so we can have a look at some of them. The first question is addressed to Stephanie. Okay. So what is MCB's strategy to assist the aging population who are not familiar with digitalization? So people who might want to adopt this but simply are not familiar. In case we are faced with another pandemic, I really hope not. But yes, Stephanie. So what is...
Great question, because I think in terms of adoption of digital payments, you've got the level of adoption depends based on the various criteria. And age is actually one of it. We've seen that people who are not the digitally natives, they're more reluctant to use digital means of payments. They like to use cash because at least it's something that they can hold on to. It's more real than a digital means of payments. So, so what do we do? A lot of education, right? So whether it is in-branch education or through what we call online tutorials, but then you would say that they're not digital. Why do you do online tutorials? So it's a combination of different things, because we've noticed that. So we've noticed that some people, they've got, because in Mauritius we've got a highly banked population and there are more cards than people on the island. So people are equipped with their cards. They know how to withdraw cash from an ATM using their card. So we are targeting this segment because we believe that the next step is easier for somebody that doesn't know how to use any means of digital payments. So we're targeting this segment and accompanying them, so that is going to supermarkets, you know, so by being present as to how to use the same card, the same PIN, but it's not just an ATM, it's what we call a point of sale, and you can do your payments. So we do a lot of education, and then what I would say, nudges or affirmative action towards digital payments. So that is give a little plus, whether it is a discount, whether it is a participation in a lucky draw. So we give nudges to slowly, you know, but surely convert people from cash to digital payments. But then we need also to be realistic, because some segments of the population, they just won't make the switch, right? However or how far you push, they just won't make the switch. So this is, we need to live by it. But I think that moving on with the new generation, etc., so there is a shift towards the adoption of digital payments.
Okay.
So we need to make it as fast and as easy as using cash. And that's why I think contactless payments is actually a great opportunity to displace cash.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have another question from addressed to Christine, actually. So how do you onboard new customers in the COVID crisis? What do you think about that?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that myself and Deenesh, I think he touched base on that before. So how do we onboard new customers? Well, it's pretty simple. We've got our work from home policies, which means that we're all equipped, you know, with our PCs, etc. And even when we're at home, it's as if we were in the office with all the VPN, and I think he can elaborate more on the security aspect of it. But the thing is that today, you know, with cloud, with Zoom, and all these solutions out there, being close to the client is not something that's, you know, impossible. So you actually just a phone call away, you're a WhatsApp away, you're a Zoom call away. So it's pretty simple, actually.
In fact, I would add that we said we're in a low-touch economy, but I think the degree of interaction with customers have actually increased.
Exactly, I agree.
So we've got
totally
higher
agree.
rate of interaction
I
through whether
agree.
it's WhatsApp or Zoom, Microsoft Teams, you name it. We digitally connect to customers.
Totally, totally.
That's great. Do we have another question? Deenesh, regarding security. So cyber security and cyber resilience, how are they different? That's a philosophical question.
yeah. In fact, you know, there is a reason of it now. We are talking about resilience.
That's right.
If we go some years back, all the focus was onto cybersecurity. So cybersecurity, you know, it's a set of controls or technology to protect your sensitive information. So some years back, our objective was to protect what we have as sensitive. But now it's a bit different, where we have to ensure both, in fact, security and resilience, where breach will happen. Hackers, or we're just waiting when will it be our turn. So it's a way of saying things, but we have to have at the back of our minds that things will happen, and how fast we recover, and what are the strategies there,
right.
and how fast we recover, and we have a low impact on our clients. So this is cyber resilience.
All right. Another question, I think this is addressed to Christine. Are virtual cards safe?
Virtual cards. So I think we touched base on that a little bit earlier as well. So virtual cards payments can be made safe in various ways. We've had an MNO. What they were actually doing with their virtual cards is actually activated only at the time of transactions, which means that at any other stage, if someone tries to make a payment with it, it'll always be declined. You've got other ways. For example, you were talking about authentication. So that's what we call 3DS2 today. So basically what we try to do with that is to authenticate that the person initiating the transaction is the rightful card holder, if I can, virtual card holder of the actual card. There's SMSs that you were talking about as well, where you actually can send the notifications to the client to contact their bank if they think that it's a fraudulent transaction. So there's all sorts of things that you can do to make virtual cards safe. But I think that the most important one that networks, at least the international networks, are recommending is the CVV2. So when you actually, the 3 little digits at the back of your card when you go on the e-commerce, so these little figures, so they can actually be made dynamic. So each time you're going online to do a transaction, you'll have a specific CVV2 just for that transaction. So yeah, I mean, virtual cards are there, but there's various ways and mechanisms to make sure that these payments are made safe.
Okay. Maybe we have time for one last question, a question for Stephanie. So how can we accelerate the adoption of digital payments? That is, I think you touched upon some elements.
Yes, so I've, as I said, it takes two to tango. So I've touched upon how to continuously educate the consumer, the user, whether it is through nudges, through education, through different use cases as to where and when he can use the card. But let's not forget also the acceptance side, the merchant side. So in the case of Mauritius, and I believe also in other African regions, digital payments cannot be scaled if you don't increase acceptance. So this is where our focus is at the moment, is how do we scale acceptance so that then it becomes ubiquitous, that is everywhere you can use digital payments. So in Mauritius, it's impossible to not do cash withdrawal, because if you go to the bazaar to go and buy vegetables and fruits, it's cash. So this is where we need to focus on, is that how do we increase acceptance, we do education, and then we've got the right ingredients for digital payments to flourish.
So it's a dual approach covering both the consumer and the merchants as well.
One cannot happen without the other.
Okay. I think we have one very last question. So let's try and answer the questions that you are submitting to us. It's for Stephanie. So does MCB have plans to offer payment solutions using virtual cards and near-field communication technology on smartphones in the near future? Or is the Mauritian market too small and not ready yet? Okay. That is an interesting question.
So I've already mentioned the business imperative to anticipate what we call macro trends. So I've mentioned that we've anticipated that contactless payments, would scale, and then there is e-commerce. So another macro trend that is happening, and it's not just in Mauritius, and Mauritius won't be an exception, is mobile-based payments. So, as you pointed out, your mobile phone is always with you.
Absolutely.
So it is the natural thing to want to pay by your mobile phones. And as mentioned, that mobile payments are also scaling, right? So yes, we are full-fledged into enabling mobile payments. And so the question was about NFC-based contactless payments. So mobile phones for me is not just NFC-based. There are different types of mobile payments. And yes, we are adopting what I call a multi-payments rail approach. So whether it is mobile payments using QR code or mobile payments through NFC, yes, this is a macro trend, and we need to gear our business towards it.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I believe we have reached the end of our webinar. I would like to thank you, Deenesh, Stephanie, and Christine for joining us and for sharing your insights. So this is the end of this webinar. The last webinar for Africa Forward Together will be this Thursday, where we will see the CEO of MCB alongside the CEO of Bank of Kigali and Equity Group, and the partner from McKinsey, Mayowa Kuriwo, join us for a discussion about their personal lessons learned and how they are facing the challenges coming over the next few months. So join us on this Thursday, and thank you for joining us today. Have a good afternoon. Bye.